As Maya said last week, continuing rapidly through Mark. Mark 1, 29. Mark 1:29. It's the same day Jesus has gone to the synagogue in Capernaum, and on leaving the synagogue, they went straight to the house of Simon and Andrew, and James and John went with them. Simon's mother-in-law was ill in bed with fever. They told him about her at once. He came forward, took her by the hand, and helped her to her feet. The fever left her, and she waited upon them. That evening after sunset, they brought to him all who were ill or possessed by devils. The whole town was there, gathered at the door. He healed many who suffered from various diseases and drove out many devils. He would not let the devils speak, because they knew who he was. Very early the next morning, he got up and went out, and he went away to a lonely spot and remained there in prayer. But Simon and his companions searched him out, found him, and said, "They are all looking for you." He answered, "Let us move on to the country towns in the neighborhood. I have to proclaim my message there also. That is what I came out to do." So all through Galilee he went, preaching in the synagogues and casting out the devils. I just really want to share a few thoughts with you and encourage you to reflect on this very domestic day after the drama of the synagogue, where Jesus spoke with authority which astonished them and then drove out a demon, and they were also astonished by that. He just goes home to Peter's house to spend the rest of the day, and the Jewish community would have had a big Sabbath meal after the synagogue, a bit like Sunday lunch. So they all went back, and he just went to the house. They found that Peter's mother-in-law was ill, and so, as somebody said, there was no lunch. So Jesus healed her, and then there was. And then he spent the rest of the day with them, and in the evening, everybody else turned up. It's this sense that if we are disciples, we can see in the heart of Jesus, not somebody who just does the temple or the synagogue or the big outdoor preaching, but actually does home as well. We need to feel in the heart of God this morning that he literally, at the end of this service, goes home with you. Quite literally goes home with you. Might be looking for some lunch and spends the rest of the day. That is a great narrative. You say, "Oh, I know all about that." But it's a great narrative to just get your head round. Because for those disciples, they might have thought the great rabbi is going to do the temple, the synagogue, or the open-air preaching place with the thousands. But they had to learn that he was going to do home as well. For us, we might feel that God does the cathedral, the chapel, Gwenup Pit. But he also does home. And this morning, Jesus wants to come to us at home, at your core. It wasn't always just in the house, but that homely sense, or even the sense of their own jobs, just the ordinary everyday, where the core of you is, where the heart of you is, what you really do. And Jesus wants to come just as he came to them. Now, the challenge for us this morning is whether we're up for that or not. You say, well, of course we're up for that. But Jesus went back to Peter's house. You remember this sort of business with Eastern hospitality. There's a sense in which Jesus just strides into somebody else's house because Peter and the others have become disciples, and so this has become Jesus' home. It is open house, if you like. He doesn't, as to use the phrase that's used slightly differently in Revelation, he doesn't have to stand at the door and knock. He just goes in. Because to be a disciple is to have open house for Jesus. And that's what they had. And he went in and he dwelt with them, sat down with them. And I wonder whether this morning we are open, or whether so much of our Christian spirituality, day in and day in and week out, is that we are not really open, and Jesus stands at the door knocking, waiting for us to open up. And our spirituality is always being stop-start, stertoric. Am I letting Jesus in or am I not letting him in? Rather than being open house. I was thinking why I was not always open house to Jesus, and for a variety of reasons. I think one is the one that Ori alluded to. We compartmentalize, we split our lives up in the subconscious into religious bits and work bits and home bits and recreational bits and all the different bits. And it isn't natural. Although we know, we were taught in Sunday school that Jesus is everywhere, and although rightly so, you still go into houses where they have it on the wall, Jesus is the head of this house, the unseen guest at every meal. I think that very often, even when I'm at home, I try and reconstruct church at home. So we have a quiet time and it's like a little service. Or we have a home group and that's a bit like church. Or we play Christian music, so you're recreating. We sung on Thursday from the Proper Methodist hymn book. We sang, "We love the place, O God, wherein thine honour dwells." Which is tremendous, but that's where it seems to dwell. And subconsciously, I so often lose it in other things because we have to get on and do this and this and this and this and this, and it's compartmentalised. Those of you with professional work, you're thinking, I have to do this now. I've said my prayers, now I need to do this. And so Jesus says, well, actually, this is your bit, Even if we build you a private chapel in our house, that's your bit. And this is another bit, and another bit, and another bit. And so really, at the end of the day, it took me, I've said this to you before, it took me so long to realize that when I was doing, and I've just done a bit more this summer, reading some sort of geography, geology, physics sort of area, that not only would Jesus be interested in giving me good concentration and peace and being able to read properly and all that sort of thing, but he knew more about the subject than I did. That's a good place. I don't say, sorry, Lord, I need to go to the library now. I do that. I'm the expert at this. When I was thinking about this on, Thursday or Friday, I'm thinking, what can I'm preparing for Sunday for the church, but then we find that the roof's fallen in the kitchen over there. So, you go over there and you go up with Trevor up this ladder and through this hole in the lath and plaster ceiling. I mention that because there'll probably an appeal later on. All right. But you think, now is Jesus, am I open to Jesus in this, or is this property? It's his property. You can fill it in for yourself. Are you open in all aspects of your life, or you don't get round to it because you compartmentalise your life? This is home, mother-in-law, everything. Mind you, there's other parts of our lives where we're definitely, it's pretty obvious, definitely are not open to Jesus because of our sin. I'm always caught by that great sort of picture you get from the Vicar of Dibley, where she has a picture of Jesus on the wall, I think possibly in Elvis Presley as well or something. And when she's about to sin greatly, which usually means she's going to binge on chocolate, she turns the picture of Jesus to the wall and says, "You won't want to see this." That's incredibly profound, because subconsciously we do that regularly. You don't want to see this. And yet those are exactly the places where we need to come in. And Jesus does not bawl us out, but seeks to forgive. And the power to forgive. We all sung that. Keep out this bit though. We don't want to see that, don't we? You don't want to see this. But there's also a much bigger area, I think, where, I don't know if you, in your house sometimes, when there's people around, you haven't got some doors locked in your house. But I'll say to Jane sometimes, just push the door too. Because we just want to talk about this, or we're going to do that, or, I'm going to change my socks, or something. Just push the door too, It's not closed, it's not open, really. And there's lots of life where we're like that. Jesus wants to come in, and you're saying in a way to God, actually, I need to sort this out. This sort of thing. I'm feeling upset about this. Let me steady myself first before I pray. sort of thing, you know? It's a personal thing, a personal issue. Or perhaps, to use the analogy of a house, I don't want you in there because it's very untidy. We've only hoovered downstairs, you know? Sort of thing. And you have lots of areas of your life when you think, I just need to get on with this. Perhaps you are hurting, perhaps you are sad, perhaps you are a bit emotional, and perhaps you're ashamed of it. I shouldn't be feeling like this is a great thing. So I don't want Jesus to be dealing with something I shouldn't be feeling anyway. I'm silly. It's only a small thing. You know, it's only a sort of bit of rubbish in the corner. Look, just push the door to. I'm just not open. It's open. And yet they are open. And you can see the challenge of not just being open, but open to everything. Because although it's open house and Jesus just wanders in, they've still got to be open about the mother-in-law being ill. We don't know if it was a deathly illness. It could have been just like having flu. And they might not have mentioned it. You know, Jesus, the master, comes. We don't want to go on about mother-in-law upstairs having flu. But it could have been they were trying to explain why there was no lunch. But they still had to decide to mention it to him. Just because he was around didn't mean he got that bit as well. How many people have I visited who said, welcome, come in, have a cup of tea. How are you? Fine. They're not, but they're not saying. So that, you're very welcome to our home, but don't go in there. That's what I'm often saying to Jesus. Not open. I would encourage you this morning, when you come to communion in a minute, say, Lord, I just would be open. And I would not just be open in an official way. In the way that some, this is not a denominational issue, but a lot of modern Anglican vicarages in the last 20 years were built in such a way that you went in the front door and there was an office and a loo, and you went into that bit and there was another door where they lived, which is a very wise way to build a vicarage. But it's not a good way to build a life. Lord, come in. In there, not there. You open. Because when they do let him in, when he comes in, when he sits down with them, it is out of that they say, oh, and by the way, the mother-in-law's ill. It's not, although Jairus and the Roman centurion are wonderful people, commended in the Bible and full of faith, they have to go to Jesus and find Jesus and tell him about something that's going on at home. But Peter doesn't have to do that. Jesus is already there. Oh, by the way, mother's upstairs. There's that intimacy of being open to Jesus, out of which prayer can come, out of which prayer becomes a mentioning it. Oh, and Lord. So. Not going to a prayer meeting, but a relationship in which you say, this is this or this, and you can mention this and this and this. It's that naturalness, that closeness, that openness. What a great thing to be able to say, oh, and there's this and there's that. And then we read that Jesus heals her. Now, let's be very clear about this. There is no such thing as a small miracle. Miracles are miracles. They're all hard. But this is not a dramatic miracle in a sense. And it doesn't need to be. This is not fire falling from heaven as with Elijah on Mount Carmel, all right? You don't need that. In a domestic setting, miracles are still miracles where Jesus gets involved and transforms the situation, but it is not some kind of great spiritual firework display. He just heals. It is still a spiritual activity. It is still supernatural. It is still a miracle. The Greek and the illness left her, the fever left her, is much the same as, and the demon left him. It's a complete distinction between exorcisms and healings in the New Testament. There's nothing naive about them then. But in this case, it left. So there's still a spiritual activity. We are not airbrushing out the miracle, as so many liberal teachers want to do, that it's significant, but it didn't happen. It does happen. And it is difficult. But it is not dramatic in that sense. In fact, here's something which we will find right through the miracles in St. Mark's Gospel. There is a sense in which this miracle is joined up with the rest. He left the synagogue, he came home, he went into the house, they told him she was ill, he healed her, they had lunch. It's not, and then, before lunch, he did a miracle. Because miracles are real. They are not paranormal. They're just extraordinary. But they're joined up with the ordinary. They're between him arriving home from the synagogue and them having lunch. And that's as miracles would be. I think we're often put off asking the Lord for help because we think that it is some kind of great spiritual firework display. And we don't quite believe it and it's not going to happen. Whereas in fact, miracles in a domestic setting are still miracles. But they are all joined up. If you pray, Lord, this is desperate, I have lost this. You've either lost it or you found it. But when you find it and he shows you where it is, then you've got it and you can do what you were going to do in the first place. It's joined up. To use the inevitable example of praying to find a car parking space. You park in it. Then you go to the shops. It's joined up. If you're seeking forgiveness, you are forgiven and you don't feel guilty anymore, so you feel something else. It's all joined up. You seeking help and against all the odds, somebody turns up to give you a hand. Will you get it done twice as quick? It's joined up. It's not, let's do a miracle. It's real. It's ordinary and extraordinary. And it is a restoration. What Jesus moves in to do within their lives is to restore something. In fact, the picture is a great picture, isn't it? He finds her upstairs laid down and he helps her up and he says, you shouldn't be lying down, you should be standing up. He restores her to a position that she can be in. And he doesn't sort of put her on the road to recovery. I mean, what is the point of somebody picking up from here on in the next 10 days if you need lunch in the next 10 minutes? He restores the situation. And then they go on with their day. What a great thing that if you come to the Lord with miracle, he will restore situations so that things can go on as they should have been going on in the first place, if this hadn't gone wrong. Not because it's demonic, but because they live in a fallen world. We live in a fallen world, and it needs restoration. What a great thing if that's happening in our lives. And then you see at the tail end of this bit, she does serve them. Now, I always thought this was a bit much, really. This was a bit sort of exploitative. For goodness sake, the woman's just been ill. You feel you should say, have a nice sit down. But you see, that's working on the precept that she's still getting better. If she's well, she's well. And what she does actually is grasp her healing and believe it and act as if she is healed. Now, I wouldn't have done that. I'd have said to mother-in-law, I'd have said, now it's great that you're better, but you better have a sit down and a cup of tea. You see? In other words, I don't quite believe that yet, but we'll see how it goes. But Jesus does not say, we better just give her the afternoon off and send in for a divine, miraculous takeaway. It goes on. When the Lord restores something in our lives, are we prepared to receive it? Or do we spend a lot of time not believing it really, still guilty about something we've been forgiven for? You know? Still not wanting to do something out of fear, which we now could do if only we would do it. She got up, she was well, and she believed she was well and acted if she was well. And everything was well. To grasp the reality of what Jesus does rather than not quite believing it and seeing how things go. Which brings us to the end of the day. This lovely domestic setting, a small thing, perhaps less than 10 people all together in this, and to think this is so great that Jesus comes to us personally, wants to dwell with us and restore us, and if only I would be open, and you think that's a great thing. And yet at the end of the day, what happens? At the end of the day, the whole city is at the door. I wanted to say at the beginning of this talk, this is Jesus at home. This is not Jesus saving the world. But that would have been absolutely wrong, because this is Jesus saving the world. Because at the end of the day, thousands of people turn up. what he's been saying before in the synagogues and outside and the miracles. Everybody wants to know. Everybody is at their door. And at that point, in that town, that little house which had been open to Jesus becomes a centre for the saving of the world. Because they want to hear what Jesus says, they want to see what Jesus does, but they want to know where Jesus is doing it, and he is there. And they have given him house room, they're going to give him a bed, they're giving him a roof over his head, they've managed to give him lunch in the end, but now they're giving him a place to be for thousands of people to turn up, and to be healed, and to be saved, and what have you. And Jesus is going on. This is not just a small domestic thing. It is a big thing. If the world is to be saved, that is millions of people, not just the odd dozen. And so even the next day when they said, everybody's here, everybody wants to see you, this is a great success. He says, brilliant, we've done that here, let's go on somewhere else. We are open to Jesus this morning. That is not just the evangelical business of the Christian who says, I just want to be friends with Jesus. It's not just a matter of having a nice time in your house group. It's not just a matter of having a few more people at church so we all feel better about it. It's a matter of saving the world. And that happens by the tens, hundreds, thousands, and millions. It needs a lot of people to do that. The whole city was at the door. There's a complete sea change, an environmental change, a political change. The whole lot are there. Not a few extra people dribbled in at the evening to see who was there. They knew he was there. And if in fact we are people whose lives are open to Jesus, if we are groups who are open to Jesus, if this church is a place which is open to Jesus, where there is open house, then the world will want to see. And we will be part of the saving of the world. That's probably why we've got a gallery. So beware. Beware cuddly Christianity. Beware, yes, Lord, I'm open to you. Please come in. Oh, we're having such a nice fellowship. All those people outside. Keep them down 1 minute. At evening, the whole city was at this door. And it was their door, and they'd come to see Jesus. The band are going to come and just come together now. And in our communion, we just want to pick up those strands. As I said earlier on, obviously I'd like you to pick up the strand of openness to Jesus. I want you to feel, as he comes in the bread and the wine, this is the heart of God to come to us. To be at home with us. And we want to give him open house. And perhaps there are things you like to bring and say, Lord, I need to be restored from this or that. Small things. Mention them to him. Don't say, well, it's a communion service, not a prayer meeting. Mention them to him. You know? But also I think we need to be aware that we are, if Jesus is with us, we will be used. We will be used for his glory. So let's just stand. We're just going to be just a couple of little quiet songs to just meditate on this. And before we come to communion, we just sing, as we are gathered, Jesus is here. That sense of real intimacy. Let's stand together, shall we? Quietly sing this together.